start? Sorry for the short delay. Some technical difficulty. So we're the Dickinson Biodiesel shop, and at the shop we're a fairly small-scale homebrew operation. The equipment that is used out on our organic farm and the president's car. And basically, we're more of an educational shop than anything. We have interns coming in during the school year and during the summer. We're producing about 100 gallons a week currently during the summer, but our estimated fuel production for the year is about 2,000 to 3,000 gallons. And so this presentation is mainly on glycerin and what to do with it. So as you all know, when you do the transesterification reaction, you get about a 5-to-1 ratio of biodiesel to crude glycerin, about 20%. So glycerin, as you probably also know, contains not just glycerin, which is a sugar alcohol, but a bunch of free-floating fatty acids, catalysts, soap, and excess methanol. So you get about 25 to 30% methanol in the glycerin layer when you do the transesterification reaction. And glycerin, as you know, and methanol, as you know, is toxic and flammable. Crude glycerin is classified as a hazardous material because the flash point of methanol is so low. So glycerin with methanol in it must have a flash point above 140 to be considered non-hazardous. So basically you have to remove most of the methanol in order for that to happen. And this complicates, obviously, the transport, the storage of your crude glycerin after you've made biodiesel. It also complicates your disposal. And so now that you have, this huge amount of glycerin when you're done producing fuel, there's a lot of, trouble that goes into figuring out what to do with it. Refining it to pure glycerin to be sold is a pretty technical and difficult procedure. It takes a lot of money invested to do that. So many small producers develop this backlog of glycerin that they don't know what to do with. And so it pays to have a plan before getting stuck with a bunch of glycerin. So what do you do with this glycerin backlog? Some industrial plants use glycerin to fuel cement kilns and burners, but this is not exactly safe, and it's not really ethical either because of hazmat classifications. You have to check with your state DEP to find out, but in the state of Pennsylvania, it's not exactly an ethical thing to do. Home burning of glycerin is definitely not recommended because if you're not burning at high enough temperatures, it's possible to get a byproduct of acetylene gas, which is toxic and really not so great. So what can you do rather than dump your glycerin or put it in compost or in landfills? In Pennsylvania, by law, you cannot store glycerin with methanol in it on site for more than a year. And additionally, the Pennsylvania Department does not allow disposal of glycerin with methanol in it. So what we're saying is change your thought process from disposal to reuse. What can be beneficial about this glycerin? What can you do with it? And so here are some other options that we've come up with. There are plenty of other options out there, but the three that we're going to talk about today is our glycerin soap production, composting glycerin, and creating biogas digesters. So for starters, do methanol recovery. It simplifies your handling, transport, and storage, and even disposal of glycerin, if that's what you're choosing to do. And it's really not that much harder than doing the reaction itself. And we're going to be giving a presentation on methanol recovery later this afternoon. So to find out more, I'll see you later. But we're finding that doing methanol recovery, we're getting about 1 to 2 gallons back from our biodiesel for a 50-gallon batch. of fuel and about 10 to 15 gallons back from glycerin, doing about a 45-gallon batch of glycerin, doing recovery on it. So additionally, it makes your glycerin a lot safer. It increases the possibilities and options you have for storing and using it. And it also increases your regulatory compliance. It's nice to not be on the bad side of the state.
When you're handling glycerin with methanol, you must be sure that you're properly storing it in containers that do not leak, that are airtight, and will not erode, because it is you do have some biodiesel sometimes remaining in your glycerin. And you make sure that it does not erode the plastic containers you use. Preferably, you should be using steel. We use several 55-gallon steel drums to store our glycerin when it still has methanol in it before we do recovery on it. This is what we used to use before our fire chief came in and gave one look at it and said no. They decided that it's a fire hazard, because if there was a fire in the shop, you could have that plastic would immediately melt and would dump an instant 55 more gallons of fuel on that fire, complicating matters. So also, in addition to for safe handling, make sure that everything is properly marked. We've had instances in our shop where we have buckets of material that we don't even know what's in it unless you do a sniff test. And you don't want to be sniffing methanol, it's just not a good plan. So when you finish your action, you go to store your methanol laden glycerin, be sure to properly label it, be sure it's in a proper container that's going to make will be there for a year. And then ideally do methanol recovery on it as soon as possible, so that way you just get it out of there and it's not sitting there.
So the first option we're going to talk about is making soap. And this is with your glycerin that's already had the methanol recovered from it. So what we do in our shop, we are working on making liquid and bar soap. Sorry, I'm going to ask you to hold the questions till the end, just because we don't have a lot of time since we started late. So what we do in our shop is we make both liquid and bar soap. And this is a result of doing the biodiesel reaction using potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide. Using the different catalysts allows you to make the different kinds of soap. Potassium hydroxide allows you to make liquid soap. Sodium hydroxide allows you to make bar soap. And as of right now, we've been using it in our shop to wash our hands, clean pots. It works for cleaning stains out of your clothes that you may get while you're working in the shop. And we've also used it to clean some messes on the floor. So step-by-step soap making. It's really, really, really simple. All you do is you take your glycerin and you start with a separate pot. You put water into it. You add your lye, which is, as you can see in this picture. And that reaction is going to be exothermic, so it's going to heat up that liquid. And then you're going to add hot glycerin to that lye water that you've already mixed. And stir it for about a minute. And then, ta-da, you have soap. And so we've been making both liquid and bar soap. And these are some recipes that we've used that have worked pretty well for us. Now we're using waste vegetable oil as our base for making biodiesel, so it may change depending on what you're using. But these are two recipes that we've used, and I'll give you guys to copy those down really quickly. And so what we've started doing is we've started trying to market our liquid soap, and I'm going to let my friend Kelly talk about that, but we're basically going to try to start selling that at our school through the shop. Is everyone good?
No.
Okay. Wait, Kelly.
Excuse me, a quick question for you. I noticed recording going on yesterday. Are these recordings going to be available to the attendees?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
They're working on it, yeah. That's the idea.
And I think you also should be able to get the presentations online at some point as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I just want to add a warning: making bar soap is a lot more difficult than making liquid soap. we had a lot more problems, including sweating and some failed batches. When you make bar soap, it has to cure for to be on the safe side about a month. And some of our earlier batches, either using too much lye or too much water, resulted in some sweating soap that till this day has not stopped sweating. Additionally, adding too much catalyst can give you a soap that kind of looks like chopped up pork, which is not so much fun to clean up when you're done, because it hardens pretty quickly and it's really gross. And using too much water or coconut oil, which is something we tried to use to harden the soap, actually gave us liquid soap that was sort of more of a gel. So maybe we can in the future figure out something to do with that. But if you're looking to make bar soap, it's kind of difficult. So the recipe that we rely on is about 20% water, 3% lye for every liter of glycerin that you turn into soap.
All right, good morning. I pretty much took on the marketing campaign for our shop. We, as Sarah said, we're a small research shop at a college, so most of our costs occur with labor costs or with material costs from like using too much or spilling or doing research, so it's nice to get some of that money back. So we started selling the soap, or we will start selling the soap probably around Monday or Tuesday, in our school bookstore. We decided to start in-house. The bookstore is part of our campus, so we're not actually selling to the direct public yet, but still we have to do some things so that we are in regulation. Methanol content, flashpoint test, that's very important. We've been sending our glycerin actually to Piedmont to get tested for flashpoint, make sure that there isn't methanol in there that can be considered toxic or hazardous to anyone who buys the soap, because that's just not good. So once we took care of that, we set up a soap survey, like any marketer. We gave out free samples, which we have 3 here, so I guess first 3 people up here can have 3 samples. But we don't have any surveys. We don't have any surveys with us though. But we did hand out surveys. We gave it to different departments on campus. Laundry department, housekeeping, the mechanics, the cafeteria. They actually came back to us wanting more. So yeah, just to see if people liked it, if it worked, does, it's great. Locations, as I said, the bookstore, we're selling it there for now. We want to move out eventually when we start producing more soap. Just so you know, we're just talking about liquid soap right now. As you saw, the bar soap, kind of iffy. Don't want it to really sweat when people get it home, so we're not selling that quite yet. But the Brown Soap Company is one of our inspirations. They sell bar soap right now. They have some pretty good recipes. We've tried to use some of them. We recommend maybe talking to the people at this company if you're interested in bar soap, going to their website. Some of the recipes they have didn't really work for us. We're trying to figure out why right now. We're still in the process of experimenting with bar soap. But that, in a nutshell, is our marketing strategy. If you have more questions on that later, we can definitely get into depth with that a little bit more, but it's not the point right now. Yeah.
Do you have to let the liquid soap cure like you do the bar?
No, you don't.
No?
You can use it right when it's done.
It's literally, it's ready within 30 minutes to mix it.
You can add scents to it. It's great.
How much do you have to warm up the glycerin before you?
We've been taking it up to about 130. We're going to see if it can be done at colder or higher, colder temperatures to see if there's any difference.
But it's really nice because as soon as we're done recovery, we can let it cool down a bit and then just take it right from the reactor, which is a lot more efficient than schlepping it into different containers and then trying to mix it later after it's cooled down. It saves definitely the energy costs.
So you're not doing any other pre-treatment or filtering to your glycerin besides the methanol recovery before making the soap?
Correct.
How are you getting the flashpoint test between those 2 points then?
The flashpoint test, we are taking samples of glycerin when we're done recovery at about 240, 250, 260, and we're sending them in. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later this afternoon. But we got results back, and in order for our glycerin to be considered free of methanol, we need to get up to about 260 degrees Fahrenheit doing recovery before it's considered safe to be put in our soap.
And a lot of the methanol you get back is pure up to a certain point. So I mentioned cost and trying to save money. You can also reuse this methanol mixed with the methanol too. So that's another way to save on costs, which we'll get into at our presentation later too.
Yeah, there'll be a lot more on that this afternoon.
What flash point does it have to be in order to be allowable to make into soap, and what methanol content does it have to be?
The hazmat classifications say that the flash point must be above 140 for it to be considered safe, and I think that's what, to have less than.
Piedmont had a really good chart. It was even with 0.5% methanol, I believe it was that will increase the flash point by 10 or decrease it by 10 degrees. And so once you get over 140, you can be almost certain that there is no methanol left.
Okay. So to make soap out of it, there's no like specific parts per million methanol that you have to make sure you have.
Just flash point.
Okay.
So I've been working on a lot of composting research. And basically, a lot of people have been using their glycerin in compost piles and not really thinking about if it's healthy for the environment or if it's really causing any effects. So that's what I've been doing, just to make sure that it is safe to be using it in the compost. And so what is compost? So basically, during compost, you have aerobic microbes that go through a process called microbial respiration, where they use oxygen to produce carbon dioxide. And through this process, the compost piles will warm up. Basically, you can use this heat as a way of tracking the compost pile stages. And there's really three main stages of maturity and activity in compost piles. There's a breakdown stage, where the temperatures can get up to like 160 degrees Fahrenheit. A transformation stage where temperature just really drops off a lot, and then the curing stage, which temperature is around like 80 degrees at this point. So composting is not dumping waste into a hole and leaving it there. So you definitely need to maintain your compost piles. And we'll go into what goes into compost piles in maybe the next slide, I think. The critical mass necessary for maintaining heat and stuff is a 3x3x3 pile, which is what we're working on at the farm right now. But there are large-scale ones called windrows, seen on the right. And so large-scale producers have been using those ones and dumping their glycerol in that one. So the critical heat is really important because it kills a lot of the pathogens in the soil, and it also kills weed seeds. So if you use this in planting and stuff, you won't have any weeds to compete with your plants. Also, if you use the KOH glycerin from your biodiesel, it will increase the potassium in your soil, which acts as a fertilizer, so it can add in that value as well. Composting is a lot of greens and browns. And basically, glycerin is high in carbon. It's moist and sticky in nature, so you want to keep that in mind when you're doing your ratios. You want a 30-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And basically, carbon is your browns and nitrogen is your greens. Your greens are like your food and your manure, and your carbons are like wood chips, dead leaves, and hay. And depending on what carbon you use, it might take longer for the compost pile to cure, because like harder carbons such as wood chips are going to take a lot longer. Also, if your ratio is off, if you have a low carbon to nitrogen, your compost pile might smell. So you really want to make sure that you have a correct ratio so it's not really smelling. A correct compost pile should not smell badly. And if you have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, it'll just take longer for the process to happen and for everything to break down. You want to use a wet sponge rule, which is basically you want to have everything moist, but not too moist, so if you squeeze it, water will come out. So it's basically just like a wet sponge. And aeration and moisture are very important, so you want to have air available to the microbes and not too much water to cause anaerobic respiration in microbes. We've covered our piles with just a compost fabric, which just waterproofs them so you don't get extra water, and we can control like how moist our piles are. And what we've been doing is adding about like 5 gallons of water every 2 weeks to our compost piles. That seems to have the right consistency in the moisture.
Do you get a lot of rain where you're at?
It's been raining a lot at night, actually.
We get a fair amount.
You get a fair amount of rain.
Typical temperate climate.
So far at Dickinson College, there's been 3 trials of compost. This is us when we were building our compost piles for this summer, which is trial 3. But trial 1 used 10 piles, and they used hay with cow manure. Trial 2 was 6 piles with wood chips and horse manure. And then our piles are with dead leaves and food from the cafeteria. So basically we had 140 gallons of food, and we mixed that 1 part to 4 parts dead leaves. So we have a lot of dead leaves with our food. We added glycerin to the piles and water with the piles as well. So we'll get to exactly how much we added in just a minute. But there's 5 saturation levels established for the trial 1 that was done last year. And they based full saturation by 18 gallons of glycerin. It's really just like trial by error to find out the saturation. It's basically how much the pile can hold without any runoff. And then from that, they established the different levels.
What size piles are these?
They're like 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet.
And that's the same for the 3 to the 5 gallons every 2 weeks, same size for that?
Mm-hmm. So what I did with the compost piles from trial 1 is I have been conducting a cucumber bioassay, and there's 10 piles, and each of them, well, there's 2 piles of both 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100. So that's your 10 piles at different saturation levels. And then I used those compost to different ratios of potting soil and vermiculite. So I had 2 controls to run the cucumber bioassay in. And what I did was I just grew these cucumber plants in different ratios to see how the plants would do in different